From Watts to DC, how 500 black neighborhoods vanished in 45 years. America's gentrified neighborhoods have lost 500,000 black people while gaining residents of every other race, a study finds. And this is by Adam Mahoney. And this was put out June 23rd, 2025. And I know we're in the year of 2026, but it is closest and relevant as to today as what's been happening in a lot of the communities. There's been a lot of gentrification, a lot of building up in a lot of the communities that I noticed, that I witnessed. So Tim Watkins is photographed in Watts neighborhood of LA. This was back in 2023, and it is combating the gentrification that has upended the community. And so Watts was 2/3 black at the onset of the 1980s, and today it is now nearly 80% Latino. And so this is Tim Watkins right here, pictured here. And so, ignited by a single arrest and fueled by decades of poverty and police brutality, the Watts uprising of 1965 turned the LA neighborhoods into a national symbol of black struggle and resilience. So thousands of black residents like Ted Watkins Sr. rose up in anger and desperation. So they were fighting for resources to maintain their neighborhoods. So in the aftermath of the rebellion, Watkins founded the Watts Labor Community Action Committee to fight for continued investment in black residents. So today his son Tim Watkins is stuck in the same battles as a president of this organization. So Watkins remembers jazz and gospel that spilled into the street corners and murals of black icons watched over bustling sidewalks. With his friends and family, he grew up listening to the melodic lines bellowing out of Central Avenue jazz clubs and the many black flea markets that would pop up alongside of the streets on the weekends. But by the mid-1980s, those same streets started to tell a different story. So today the murals of black heroes have faded from walls, and Spanish language signs now match the number of those in English. Sounds of cumbia ring louder than horn-laced jazz notes. So often these changes are framed as progress, yet for black communities across America, erasure feels closer to the truth. So over the past 50 years, gentrification has swept through hundreds of majority black neighborhoods, propelled by policies and practices that favor developers and newcomers while longtime residents lose their footing. So once thriving centers of black cultures, businesses, and political power have been hollowed out as rents climb and home values surge, a new nationwide study has put into perspective. So no racial or ethnic group has experienced more negative impacts from gentrification than black people, according to the researchers from the National Community Reinvestment Coalition, a coalition of 700 nonprofit organizations focused on directing resources to America's most vulnerable communities. As hundreds of black communities across the country have been gentrified since 1980s, more than 500,000 black people have been pushed from their homes. So those neighborhoods have seen more than 3 million new Latino, Asian, white residents, with cities like Atlanta, Washington, New York, San Francisco witnessing entire neighborhoods transforming within a single generation. So perhaps no one has seen this more intimately than Tim Watkins. So his Watts neighborhood, which was 2/3 black at the onset of the 1980s, is now nearly 80% Latino. Over the same period, 92 82% of the Los Angeles majority black neighborhoods that experience gentrification are no longer majority black. So that is a greater percentage of black neighborhood loss than any other metro area in the nation. Washington is at a close second, losing 84% of 55 majority black areas since 1980. 60 years later, we're in a rear view mirror, said Watkins, whose organization works to combat black displacement through several housing, employment, and environmental initiatives. The war on poverty was implemented in a way that it became a war against poverty, the poverty-stricken. So, and now, decades after first experiencing the mass displacement of black residents, his neighborhood is changing once again. Over the past decade, more than $1 billion of private and public money has flowed onto the properties in Watts. Luxury condos, trendy cafes have replaced longtime family businesses, while rent prices soar beyond what existing residents can afford. This transformation is driven by developers capitalizing on Watts' prime location and cheap land values, turning what was once California's most neglected neighborhoods into a profitable investment opportunity that pushes out the very communities it claims to help. So when gentrification enters a neighborhood, he said, that typically means the powers that be are going to object to everything that currently makes a community colorful, including us. So the study found that more than 500 majority black neighborhoods have been affected by gentrification over the past 50 years. Today, half of these neighborhoods are no longer black. In comparison, roughly 80% of the white neighborhoods that experience gentrification remain white after the process happens. So in total, roughly 15% of the urban U.S. neighborhoods have gentrified over the past 50 years, and gentrification most often has taken place near downtown areas, study found, with the downtown areas in Washington, New York, Philadelphia, New Orleans, Atlanta, and San Francisco Bay Area topping the list. The Great Displacement. So this chart will show 10 metros that had the most majority black neighborhoods that were gentrified from the 1980s till 2010, and even still happening today, so I might add. So the percent shows the share of those neighborhoods that are still majority black today. So you see New York, Washington, D.C., Chicago, Atlanta, Los Angeles, Detroit, New Orleans, Philadelphia, Houston, and Indianapolis. So the National Community Reinvestment Coalition, New York is ranked first for most majority black neighborhood experiencing gentrification. Indianapolis ranked 10th on the chart. And this is by Adams Mahoney. So Washington witnessed the erasure of its legendary Sunday African drumming circles in Malcolm X Park as the city's transformation from Chocolate City into upscale cafes and restaurants catering to white newcomers displaced the artists and cultural keepers who had made the nation's capital a hub of black creativity and political power. Atlanta's Old Fourth Ward he experienced such dramatic racial upheaval that it flipped the majority black to the majority white after the East Side Trail of the Beltline opened in 2012, with gleaming apartment complexes rising on formerly vacant industrial land. More than 20,000 black residents were displaced from neighborhoods that had anchored generations of families. So the New York's gentrifying neighborhoods like Harlem, Brooklyn, and informal networks of community connections where neighbors once once acknowledged each other on the street and gathered in an impromptu block parties with music have been fractured, as newcomers who don't understand existing cultural norms increasingly call 311 to complain about the expressions of Black and Afro-Latino culture that define these spaces for decades. In Watts, as described by Watkins, gentrification has had a profound impact on both the social fabric and the levels of violence within the community. The influx of the new residents and redevelopment projects has brought that violence in Watts, which has one of LA's highest rates of gun violence and homelessness, is not simply a product of individual choices or family structures, but is deeply rooted in systemic neglect, environmental injustices, and the failure of government to enforce protections that would keep residents safe. As funding for affordable housing and environmental protections is cut, the community, which once home to the city's largest concentration of public housing, has become more vulnerable to both physical and social displacement. All of the playing fields have been rigged. This was said by Watkins. And now it seems with the changes and the federal level, there is no more focus on addressing the playing field. So however, the fight against gentrification is not passive, he said. The Watts Labor Community Action Committee is leading a community-driven strategic planning process, insisting that only those with the Watts area zip code can participate. And by documenting the community's history, forming homeowner associations, and controlling land ownership, the organization is working to ensure that the community retains agency over its future. And so the resistance is grounded in self-determination, collective memory, and a refusal to let outsiders dictate the future of the neighborhood. The committee is currently procuring grants to build 2,000 units for unhoused people in Watts. And so this right here is happening as we speak on this video. So I've been to the neighborhood that you're looking at right here, and they have torn down a lot of the old project buildings and they've created new ones and moved everybody into the new complexes. But it could be a new trap for something else to displace the people that are in the new buildings eventually. Now it's supposed to be controlled by it's supposed to be low income, but they have redeveloped it. I don't know if that funding that they get for that program will continue, but that's what they've been doing. So these were, you see what was the old projects versus the new developments that they're building over there. And so it's the new buildings that are seen under construction next to the historically Black Jordan Downs public housing complex in 2021. And so that's basically what you're seeing here. So how does gentrification work and who does it benefit? The term gentrification was coined by a sociologist, Ruth Glass, in 1964, and it began to take hold in the U.S. during the mid-1960s, especially as deindustrialization left urban neighborhoods where Black people settled during the Great Migration from the South, economically vulnerable and ripe for reinvestment by wealthier newcomers. So Black Americans are disproportionately and negatively impacted by gentrification due to a legacy of discriminatory housing policies like redlining, exclusionary zoning, and unequal access to credit, which historically confined Black residents to specific neighborhoods and limited their ability to build generational wealth. As gentrification unfolds, it further deepens racial inequalities in housing, education, and economic opportunity. To complete the study, researchers have looked beyond the usual statistics connected to gentrification, income, home value, and college degrees, and they track the rise of professionals and managers, observe shifts in the racial and ethnic makeup of blocks, and followed the flow of mortgage dollars into what once overlooked the streets. And so the research also expanded beyond the traditional vision of gentrification that is focused on house flippers to look at how urban planners and developers arrive to remake entire communities. So Bruce Mitchell, the leader researcher, explained that revitalization on paper brings hope to communities with new services, fresh amenities, infrastructure, where neglect has long taken root. For longtime residents, these changes can ring hollow. The benefits, such as better parks, safer streets, new businesses, rarely flow to those who endured years of disinvestment. Instead, newcomers, often higher incomes, white, settle into the improved landscape, able to shoulder the rising costs. So as the national housing shortage pushes gentrification into newcomers, researchers urge urban planners and policymakers to act with urgency, particularly by including community members early and often in the process of directing money into neglected communities. So when Chocolate City loses its flavor. So this is a civil rights lawyer, Ari Teresa, photographed here in 2018 in Washington, that has filed an anti-gentrification lawsuit alleging the pattern and practice of discrimination and disparate treatment against African American residents living in predominantly African American neighborhoods. And so this is him pictured here. So Ari Teresa is the fourth generation Washington resident whose family has witnessed the city's transformation through segregation, civil rights, and now gentrification. So as an adult, seeing the corner stores, churches, and community centers that shaped his childhood disappear, he began to connect the dots of how the city systemically engineered the displacement of black families through policies, initiatives designed to attract wealthier professionals, beginning with rezoning areas appeals that targeted public housing around 2014. Teresa discovered that DC's rapid development was intrinsically linked to displacement. And we know displacement of who. So the city's strategy became clear through policy documents that explicitly targeted what officials called creative class professionals, highly educated individuals of 24 to 38 years of age with dual incomes and no children. So the motivation was purely economic, he said. Large poor families were seen as a drain on social services, while wealthy professionals would provide less need for social services, more tax base. So Teresa has filed a federal lawsuit against the administration of Mayor Muriel Bowser and multiple DC government agencies, alleging a pattern and practice of discrimination and disparate treatment against African American residents living in predominantly African American neighborhoods through the systemic mishandling and development appeals in black communities while providing preferential treatment to wealthier white neighborhoods. However, Teresa observed a striking reversal during the COVID pandemic, as the same wealthy residents who had been courted began leaving the city, prompting DC to protect landlords' commercial real estate interests while continuing to burden struggling homeowners. It's interesting that the city has chosen to bail them out in various ways, whereas when regular folks fall on hard times, the tact is to let them fall or fail. he noted, highlighting the persistent double standard in how the city treats different economic classes during times of crises. So the disappearance of Black Los Angeles. In LA, this displacement of Black residents from historically Black neighborhoods has been and was a process that has orchestrated to then make room for gentrification, argued by Marnay Campbell, African American Studies professor at Loyola Marymount University in LA. So she explained how the convergence of multiple factors in the 1980s to the 1990s, including deindustrialization and the crack cocaine epidemic, mass incarceration, and the 1984 Olympics, created conditions for what she describes as systemic targeting for the working class Black neighborhoods. And so often gentrification and displacement go hand in hand, but in LA it is a unique outlier, explained Campbell. What then made LA especially unique compared to other heavily gentrified American cities is that when Black families left these neighborhoods, they were primarily replaced by Latino families rather than white residents, creating a distinctive demographic shift. So in LA, displacement of Black folks predates gentrification, but it was still a coordinated attack to erasure of us, she explained. Latinos families often shared similar economic circumstances with Black families who had previously lived there, keeping these neighborhoods within reach for working class residents while remaining less attractive to white buyers initially. So it delayed the process of gentrification but still led to the erasure of much of the Black Los Angeles. In recent years, it laid the foundation for political battles between Black and Latino residents. And while these same neighborhoods are becoming gentrified and increasingly whiter, Campbell, the author of Making the Black Los Angeles, also drew connections between the historical pattern and the current concerns about homelessness and the displacement of LA prepares to host an Olympics again in 2028, suggesting that the similar forces of systemic removal are now targeting the city's unhoused population, and many of whom are also Black, without targeted intervention and making sure that Black voices are maintained and heard in redevelopment plans. Black people will always be pushed out. This is what she was saying. Looking at the present day gentrification trends, she warns that displacement cycle is accelerating because of the lack of commitment of Black residents. So Black people are still here and looking for houses. Even in South Central, they're being outbid by white families who can bring cash, she said. We're in a crunch for affordable housing. To view the entire database, accompanying map, and outlines of gentrification and displacement nationwide, click here. And so that's Adams Mahoney at the bottom, who is a climate and environment reporter for Capital B. He can be reached at the email at the bottom. And so you see the gentrification, there's issues that have to do with gentrification, LA, Washington, to Watts, and to DC, of course, and Black wealth. So this article, I thought it was beneficial to read it because the gentrification is happening, and it is happening in rapid pace. So this is what I've witnessed recently, where you see the old projects versus the new, and there's no guarantee that those projects are going to remain. Now what is happening now in 2026? Just like they have targeted Black residents, they are now targeting the Latino residents of the communities with deportation policies that won't hire Latino people and residents. So what has happened to erase Black communities is now happening to erase Latino communities in one full smooth swoop under this administration, the Trump administration. And they've even went so far as to try to pull monies from schools that are in the areas that will defund these schools, because primarily a large percentage of the students that attend the schools are Latino or Hispanic of some culture, and a lot of these schools that have the higher percentage of those students are being defunded as we speak. So the same targeting that they have done so heavily on black residents is now happening to the Latino communities. And there's going to be, and I have to say this, an erasure of those communities as well. They're trying very, very hard to do that by deportation, and it has been really a rough year. And now we have food prices going up, gas prices going up, rent prices going up, rent is rising, and displacement of people of all groups if you don't have the money. So that is what has been happening more often, and that's what I'm seeing. That is in 2026. So this article was in 2025. So just that quickly, that is how things are happening. And I'm sure a lot of people have seen the shooting of a white woman, Renee Good, and Alex Preddy, a white man who was a nurse. And then there's also been the killing of a black man who was celebrating the coming of 2026 New Year, and he was murdered by an off-duty officer that was supposedly ICE. I believe it might have been an off-duty ICE officer, and so he was gunned down and killed, and they're still seeking financial judgment for that killing as well. So there's a lot of changes that are rapidly happening in real time, and they're happening like really, really quickly. And we have been seeing changes with the voting. We've been seeing changes with the different policies that are coming out. There's different programs that are being cut. There's a strike that is looming with LAUSD. There was also a lawsuit that was bizarre, stating that white children or students were discriminated through the LA Unified, when primarily a lot of the students, if I'm thinking about this correctly, you'd find that most of the students, a large number of them, were the Latino, Hispanic community, and some black kids. And a lot of times what I've witnessed, those white kids that they claim they discriminate, if they're white kids going to public schooling, they're going in an area where maybe it has a lot of people, that residents that are where it's white, and they're working class, or they're poor white. But a lot of times you'll find that those parents will opt to put their children in private schools, or schools that don't have primarily Latino and black students. So that's why they find that lawsuit bizarre, because why can you say that they're being discriminated when most of the students, a large percentage of them, aren't white students, or they're students of color, students of some ethnic other background, primarily, largely. And so that's the reason why that whole thing, it's really, when you look and read through history, it's been the other way around, where black and Hispanic students, and primarily black students, have been the ones that have been discriminated or denied some type of educational gain over so many decades, to where they've had to make provision to try to bring some type of monies into schools to try to give better books and better funding or raise funding for schools, so, and especially schools that are in areas that have crumbling infrastructure. And then I've heard things about Detroit. I've seen documentaries of Detroit where kids are having to be bused to schools outside of their communities because the schools in their communities have been so disinvested in. They have closed. There's a lot of closures of schools, just schools, buildings that are empty and abandoned, books sitting there just like dust and rot, and kids having to go and be bused and have to travel long distances just to go to school, just to get an education. And so that isn't black and brown communities that are discriminating whites. That is black and brown communities that have been discriminated towards. They've been discriminating that group instead. So it doesn't make any sense. So that claim, I believe, came from the Trump administration and then some other people who have been pushing that, because they've been using this flipping method where they've been trying to, everything that has happened to people of color that have been injustices, they've been trying to make it seem like it's happened to white people, when we clearly you don't see that is the case. If you look at a lot of these documentaries and a lot of the things that have happened over so many years and decades, it's been the other way around, where black and Hispanic communities have faced, especially heavily black communities have faced, a lot of disinvestment, erasure, discrimination, and a lot of egregious policies that target those communities, so that a lot of people could end up falling into eviction or maybe foreclosure even. They always seem to bail out banks, but like when people need help, you never get that help. So I get it, but this is what's going on right now, and it's gotten worse. And now the gas prices have gone up. Now we got a war with Iran, and we hear this President Trump saying that it's going to end soon, but we look like, when we're looking at it, it looks like it's just beginning. It's getting worse, and it's caused the gas prices to be almost, some places it's $5 or $6 a gallon. It's going to be worse.